Sure. Hi, I'm Jenny. It's nice to be here. I am a software architect at Pluralsight, so that's kind of how I came to Wardley mapping and met Ben. Uh, Found a bunch of information when I was starting to look into understanding value chains, breaking down black boxes, helping people coordinate and strategize. That's kind of what I was looking for solutions. As an architect, when you're like a building engineer, a civil engineer, you're blueprinting things, and software hasn't had anything that's really great. I mean, we've got UML, but it's not great for actually building blueprints. And Wardley Maps seems to be like this awesome way of helping you build a blueprint and move into strategize and gamification of that blueprint, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, it feels a little bit more like play. And so, just a quick meta note. Um, I accidentally had myself muted for that whole intro, and so
Oh,
you heard the two of you heard me, but nobody else did. So they're all like, "What's the context here? I don't know what's going on." So it just as a quick attempt at the intro. So I'm Ben. We've got David here as well, David Hall, and we've got Jenny Carlston with us. And Jenny was just kind of like giving us a quick intro into how she got interested in maps and the kind of playfulness and the being able to work on something together. And I think so. It's interesting you said gamification, right? Because that's something I've been like trying to learn a little bit about, because especially when we're all on these Zoom calls and stuff like that all the time, it's like, gosh, do we just like have faces talking at each other from 2D space, and I'm supposed to pay attention and know when it's my turn to talk and all this kind of stuff? The interaction that happens when you start mapping is like, by contrast, amazing. Like it doesn't matter if it's Wordly mapping or some other like visual thing where at least you're working on a thing together. Like, I swear you could probably do it with a Google Doc, and I know you've showed me all sorts of ways that you do that style of collaboration. But I mean, what is different from, in your view, from like Wordly mapping as compared to, like, I don't know, just writing an essay in a Google Doc or something like that?
uh, well, there's a lot of different aspects to it. So collaborating, writing a Google Doc can be fun. Collaboration of any kind can be fun, but when it's a visual thing and everybody can move parts and pieces around and see how things connect and rediscuss and reiterate and iterate on it, it becomes like you start sharing this mental model. Like, you've all got your own divergent mental models going on about something. And when you're putting it down on a map, you can get all of them together and you can start learning how to tell the story in a way that makes sense to every single one of you.
Yeah.
And I've had these experiences with people that I'm mapping with now, where it's like we're all talking, it's like this kind of chaotic thing, and then this story starts emerging where it's like, oh, this connects to this over here, and everybody's using different language, everybody's like saying different things and talking about different components, but it all starts converging in this map that makes it so that it makes sense to everybody, and then they can take that map and start building a story with other people. And
Yeah.
I've seen that happen a few times now, and it's so exciting.
And this is
It's
a recent kind of
it's
development,
it's
right?
energizing. Yeah, yeah.
Like you just I know we've talked a lot, and I think this is the story for many people doing mapping, right? They like they've read the book, they've seen a couple examples, they've tried it maybe for themselves, but like doing it in a team context is a whole different game. So what has that been like, transitioning from just doing mapping on your own, like doing your own kind of sense making and storytelling, to sharing that experience with others and doing it for real, right?
Yeah, it doing it for myself has been awesome because I can use it as like the self-actualization tool, which is something I've been diving into more. But when you take it to other people, they make connections that you don't, and they connect words and language and actions to different things than you do, and so they can say, hey, I know about this thing over here and that connects in this way. And the more people you get involved, the more dynamic it becomes. And if you give it something of a structure, which is why I've been liking like using the driver navigator mob programming type practices when we map, it can help like encourage everybody to talk.
Ooh,
So,
yeah.
like you're getting you're taking turns and you're going through a rotation on who's driving and who's navigating, and so everybody gets a turn to talk about what they're thinking, and it gets added into the map, and everybody's like, ooh yeah, and there's this thing over here, and they're having fun at the same time they're building their own understanding.
Oh, okay. So that makes me feel really excited because one, as someone who started out in systems administration and kind of never got to play like a developer role, like really, I feel like I missed all the fun stuff around like pair programming and mob programming. And I know, was it Woody's Will? Is that like the name? There are all
Yep.
these like sorts of interesting approaches to doing work together that looks on the surface like to be inefficient, but actually it's optimizing for a different thing. It's optimizing for the communication and in the moment sense making. Um,
Yeah.
so could I like I actually am really curious about what mob worthy mapping looks like, and I feel like I think you're the first person to consider combining worthy mapping and mob, uh, like the mob programming construct, at least as far as I know. And I feel like I have no idea what that looks like. I don't know what it feels like. I almost want to just like play with that and do that a little bit. Would that be cool with you?
Yep, totally cool.
Awesome. So we got this Miro board here, and I'm just gonna we had a couple articles we were looking at earlier, and if I just like kind of we're gonna play in this zone right here. How do you even get started? I think that's the hardest part for a lot of people.
Okay,
So like, what's your approach?
so my approach is, what I do is we decide on what we're going to be mapping about, and we start using like your template essentially, where we're like figure out who the top level users are. And a lot of times people will start with internal users, and you have to say, now take a step back, who are the actual customers, and who are the people that we're ultimately going to be collecting and providing value to. So, who's actually paying for it, who's actually paying for whatever we're building on the highest level. From there, once we've identified the users, then we start identifying the like maybe the front stage users, like the people who they were talking about initially as the people inside the company that we're building a system for. um, and how kind of the so we figure out from there, we're starting to identify the needs, using your template from the learn Wardley mapping site. And what I do a lot of times with needs is I try to go really high level. I look at like Maslow's hierarchy, and I look at, like, is this what needs are we meeting from a like human centric point of view, and then maybe dive into using the NVC needs list, which is from nonviolent communication. And I say, okay, here are some high level needs. And then we start looking at like how those feed into the needs that they were probably initially talking about as they're telling the story of what's going on in the company. Like things like, I need to review this library of things in order to figure out what we should be doing, things like that. You kind of break the needs down into more specific uh, things that you might have components and capabilities built for.
Okay, that makes sense so far. So we've got kind of like this process from top to bottom, and um, part of what I'm wondering about is like let's like play with this. Let's make it real quick.
Yeah.
And which template do you end up using? Is it the one that's in the Miro template library, or have you been using like the let me see, it's like a
It's got like users, and then below it, it's got needs. and then it's below that. It's got, I think, capabilities, or it says lists or something like that.
Got it. Okay, so this is the template. I'm gonna paste it in here from, and anyone in the chat can get it by just going to lwm.events/1. I'm not very creative with URLs, please forgive me. But is this the right template?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So this template on the left, it has, lists, users, needs, capabilities, like Jenny was saying, and on the right we have like a value chain, and so it's like the first two steps.
Yep.
Well, large,
That's the first two steps.
groups of steps maybe. Okay, so I locked this down. Like, let's like play with this a little bit. So I've been having a moment today. I've been railing against Slack in particular. I've been really frustrated with first of all, like they're like they've missed something really important in their platform, which is like having a block button for people. So like they're really missing like an obvious anti-harassment capability. And I know like like we're not supposed to be used for free communities and open source communities and things like that. It was like, yes, but that's what people are using it for. So don't just take the benefits of that free advertisement, like also maybe sit with and deal with the real impacts of your design. So I was just like railing about this for a while today because it's making me grumpy. And so I thought to myself, like, if I wanted to build a community today, let's say for people doing Wardley mapping stuff, like I've already seen different kinds of ways this can play out and the ways that it doesn't work. Like I've seen LinkedIn groups not quite work. I've seen forums not quite work. I've seen Slack communities not quite work. I've seen just like asynchronous Twitter stuff not quite work. Like I've got all these opinions about what doesn't quite work. So now I'm like, well, I should just build something. And that is like probably the worst conclusion to come to. So walk me through this process, like again, like so is that like, okay, what are we going to map about? Does that like cover the basis for what you would think would meet that question?
So are you wanting to map about like the frustration you're having, or do you want to map a system that you'd like to build?
I think I'd like to engage in a little bit of like futurist idealism here and just map something I'd like to have already built, I think.
Okay.
So like, okay, Ben builds a thing, let's say, for Wardley mapping community stuff. And okay, so is that a way to phrase the answer to that question? Does that seem reasonable? Okay.
Yeah. A thing I might dive into what you mean by thing a little bit.
Excellent.
And so, what I start doing when I'm doing this is I start picking apart people's language. Well, you said this term. What does that really mean?
Oh, thing. Okay.
Yeah, like thing. What does thing mean to you?
Okay, so
And
far,
so a lot of times what I do is I just start capturing the terms people use as they're talking. Well, like I'll put that as Post-it notes all over on the side. So that's something I didn't mention.
oh,
So
that's
they're telling me things, and I'm like, these are all the or the nouns that they're really saying. And so you said thing for Wardley mapping community. What, like, is there a need you're trying to meet?
or did I just wake up and feel like building something today for my own?
Yeah.
Whose needs am I really meeting? Yeah,
Yeah.
and this like ties in well with the question that Megamorph in chat asked. Just like I mainly have experience mapping on my own. Like, how do you as a moderator engage with folks so that they find the process useful? And I think like that was one of the big tricks you just shared right here. Is like you just listened to what people are saying and you noticed when they're using words that we haven't talked about yet or we haven't defined, and like, oh, there's something interesting there. And like notice we haven't even started like mapping. Like this is just an informal conversation. This like we've documented Jenny's algorithm behind the scenes here, but like that's not anywhere for anyone else to see so far, right? Like all they see is sticky notes of you saying, what's thing, what's that?
What's that thing? Yeah.
So I'll this thing like I've been struggling to find words for it, so I'm so glad you asked. Like I was thinking almost like, what would a platform for art critique look like? And I was wondering if that's like a useful metaphor for like a platform for Wardley mapping critique.
Art critique. Okay, so you're thinking about critiquing So when you think about critiquing, I guess what does that entail?
I know what it's not. I have opinions about what it's not for sure. Like, I think probably what happens a lot of times in text based things where like the text is the main medium, like you end up with a lot of like over intellectualization of the maps. And like it starts out like really simple like this, where hey, I made a map. Could someone tell me if I did a good job or not? Or could someone challenge it for me? And the answer is no, because they have no clue about your context. And like there's a second best way to deal with that, which for me it's like, okay, I'll try to literally read it and tell you what I see. Just reading the words and the relationships. It's like, oh, you have this user and they have this need, and this is the system of dependencies that meet that need. I can talk about that, but it's not providing really value to them except telling them whether they've mechanically made a map successfully or not. And like the other extreme of that is just let's have a big intellectual conversation about whether or not this is even a valid line of inquiry and like all this kind of stuff. And I feel like people get lost in the weeds, and still nobody's making maps to have that conversation. They're just like talking about it. Um,
Mhm.
so my ideal, I think, is we could someone could share a bit of a map, or we could build a map together, or like even if it's a PNG or a JPEG or something, we could zoom in on that one component and have like a little conversation about it, and then make a whole map about that component or something.
Okay. So so the thing you're talking about would allow people to so this is another thing I do is I try to restate it in different words in the ways I'm understanding it. And
Yeah.
often I'm very, very wrong. And that's okay. Like being wrong is like where you find the dynamism, I guess.
Yeah.
Right.
I
And
love
and
being wrong.
realize, oh, you realize, oh, I really didn't communicate what I was thinking very well. Or you realize, oh, like, oh, this makes sense in a different way. And so you're imagining something where people could submit a map that they've created and start a conversation that allows them to rebuild it. Is that does that summarize what
Ooh.
I'm hearing?
Yeah, I think that it starts to feel right. I think the other thing I'm noticing is like there's this difference between time as in like seconds, like 1, 2, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, that kind of notion of time, and then there's like this other version of time which is about like events. Um, like I'm imagining as a newcomer entering some platform like this, right? And instead of being deluged with a bunch of topics that are just confusing because text is the principal thing, or a stream of consciousness thoughts from a chat channel, what if the main unit of event or time in a platform like this is a map or an image, a provocation of sorts that calls people in and beckons them in to have a conversation about it or its specific parts. So I see we're going back and forth. We're kind of like riffing on this a bit, and like I'm changing it every time you play it back to me, which is like half the joy of this, I think.
I can see that. Okay,
Yeah, I
so
think there's so much use in that too, because it's hard enough to hold everything that's in our own brain together at one time. And when you start to introduce a bunch of other people and other thoughts in other brains, it's really hard to start like saying, oh yeah, I know you just said like 20 things and I just said 20 things, but what did we mean by that? And
Yeah, but in this
am I
case,
going to forget half of those soon?
at least they're written down though, right? It's like Jenny
Yeah.
has written them down, and now we can't like forget, which I think is the default state, right? We just forget the stuff that we say.
Mhm.
mhm.
So now we've got building context, evaluation, replay, image, etc.
I don't know, forgetting and um, recording, something like that. It's kind of around what we were talking about. Um, there's this, that's all part of like conversation. I don't, so as we're going through this, like, I feel like we kind of got, are we using the map as the vehicle to facilitate the conversation?
I was thinking like the mobbing, the
Uh-huh.
mob mapping. It seems really exciting to me.
Hmm.
Let's like showcase that. So like
Okay.
here's like a goofy example, right? Like how would does David have a role and I have a role? Like how does mobbing work in this context?
Yeah. Okay. So as far as mobbing goes, usually, like I said, I start with getting things down, and then as if someone it works well when someone understands a system that's already been built to a certain extent or that's been thought through. And usually I end up being the facilitator when it's something that we're in the process of building and understanding more
Got it.
coherently.
Okay.
So it's like your domain expertise, your level of domain expertise matters. But when you have a high level of domain expertise, then you usually assign the least experienced person to be the driver. And that person is who's putting things on the map. And the domain expert is talking, just kind of like you do with event storming and stuff in the domain driven design community. I don't know who, like maybe that's going to go over people's heads that are listening, but
Go Google that.
yeah, go Google that.
Yeah, event storming and domain driven design. Um, so like, could I put David on the spot? Could David be our driver?
Mhm.
Only
Yeah.
because he doesn't know what's in my head.
Yep.
So David,
That's what you think.
oh no. So
All right. Yeah. Okay. So if I'm driving,
Jenny's got all the words on the page. She's got them out of my head, and now like we've got the lists, right? The Wardley
yeah.
list
Mhm.
things. So what's David doing as a driver or as a
So as a driver, you are basically like you would be taking the things someone's saying and putting them on the map and like start positioning them. You might say, okay, well, what users are going, who are the people that are going to be using the system, that this thing that you want to build
so David needs
first?
to drag
Okay.
those answers out of me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I'm looking at the stuff that we've pulled out, I don't see a specific user listed yet, unless I'm missing something.
There's a
Other than
little
Ben,
bit
Ben
of,
builds a thing.
yeah, and the Wordly mapping community. So like there's
Well, yeah.
Wordly map,
Let's run with
Wordly.
that. Anybody who's doing Wordly mapping. So Wordly mappers sounds fabulous.
Okay. So
Yeah.
let's say I've never done any of this before. I don't know what I'm doing, which isn't
Okay.
totally far from the truth in some cases. So I would say
Wordly map.
for who are, yeah, we want to do Wardley mappers.
And I just put that over in the users section.
Okay.
And
And
then
then so what do they need? They need a thing
we need a thing. That's a capability,
that's
really,
that's
right?
that's built by Ben.
Yeah. They need a thing. Is the thing a tool?
Um,
We don't
so
know.
I'm wondering then, from your perspective, Ben, is what they need is a way to be able to critique?
So here's like a weird idea. Yes. Short answer, yes. I think they need a way to do critique in like a like an opinionated but enlivening way. And like
Hmm.
we could build the perfect tool that does exactly that, but I suspect we could probably just create some social processes and use something like Miro or Google Docs or anything, right? So I'm wondering what those parts are, like how all that fits together. So critique, I think, is the main capability, but uh,
So what I might advise you to do is go to this needs inventory. And I don't know how to like
ooh,
show
yeah.
it to everybody,
Is this the
but
NVC?
yeah, this is the NVC needs inventory, and you can kind of just get ideas around what you want to meet. Like there's things around the contribution or discovery,
All right, I'm gonna post that in
communication.
the chat for everybody if you want to check that link out. Okay, so I'm looking at the needs inventory.
And I've pasted the image into the Miro board so we can maybe look at it real quick.
Cool. Yeah, this is great.
So that can kind of help you focus on what you really want to do. Like there's communication there is always a big one, I think. Give people belonging to the community might be a part that this tool could help them, meet to get them to participate, all that kind of thing. So community might be part of the goal, is building that.
Mm.
Um,
So we should maybe like mark these, I guess, like maybe circle.
yeah. So what I do is I just, from there, I will put those needs in that part, and
Right.
and I actually do
Nice.
them a lot smaller so that I can say, here's the high level needs, and this is like kind of I don't know how to term them, but there's like
Oh.
there's a hierarchy of needs, right? Like there's a hierarchy of needs from not only like Maslow's hierarchy, but of the needs that you're meeting, like the level of specificity and the level of like detail that all feed into these higher level human needs.
That makes a lot of sense, and oh, I'm just getting excited thinking about it, right? Because I've always been, and David knows, like we've been trying to crack the egg, or I don't know, the problem of like how do you deal with like a detailed understanding of user needs. So you start with like the fundamental needs,
Yeah,
and
sometimes it's this way. So it's like they know what the needs are, and then you funnel them into like the fundamental needs so that you can really focus in on what's important.
okay, excellent. So belonging to community, like so if I said like a low level need was discussion,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I just like put that under. Oh, I guess David's supposed to be driving. I'm sorry. I messed up, David.
Oh no.
Yep. So I
So
might put this
is there,
as a higher, a little bit higher, and then I'd have like discussion and
yeah.
critiquing and evaluation. Those all kind of feed into that sense of belonging. And there might be other needs, higher level needs like um, autonomy or, connection.
Mm.
And so you're saying like autonomy would be higher level need?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that,
Because
so
it's
we
like
would
a
put that
human
up
need.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And so these kind of go, I'm not going to get too
Yeah.
wild with the connections yet, but
Yeah. Yeah.
so we've
Don't
got a
even.
few things.
I see. I could just go through all this and just be like, yeah, that and that
Yeah,
and that, yeah, and just like have a whole list of these ready to go.
this is great.
I love
Thanks for
this,
sharing that
Jenny. This
list,
is
Jenny.
huge.
Yeah. And so from there, then I start thinking about, well, what enables discussion? What enables critiques? What enables this evaluation?
Hmm.
That kind of meets those belonging to community and those autonomy needs. And there may be different tools for all of those things
That makes sense.
that
So
you can imagine.
I imagine like a an artifact, like a something to
Okay.
look at, like a map, say.
Okay.
So we've got build map. Is that close
That's
So
close enough for me.
language
yeah,
wise?
it's close enough. Or I
Okay.
just put map, because
Hmm.
build is a verb. I'm just working with nouns at this point.
Uh,
Verbs
No
end up
verb in
becoming
it.
Interesting.
relationships later on.
Yeah, that's a helpful distinction too.
Yeah.
Okay, so we need map. What about image? Do you feel that that's similar to a map?
Hmm.
Is
That
it
might be
different
that
from a
might be
map?
yeah, but there might also be other things that go into a map as well.
Mhm.
Like we're doing a Miro board, so we're actually using Miro right now as to build our map, right? So you might put that as a tool or a capability that helps you build that.
Yeah.
And I use Lucid. I've used Google Sheets, you know, And a lot of times then I start color coding based on what kind of thing they are, just to give me uh, better separation of what's going on.
Yeah, and I think one more thing that I think is really important to this system is like a place for questions. Like just being able to, I don't know, I think mapping is often about like being able to ask new questions. So like what if
Mhm.
that was the only thing you could do is ask questions and respond to those questions?
Okay.
So that's like good enough for me. So Jenny, from the mobbing standpoint, like is there anything that we didn't get to exercise like as far as the facilitation style, or is that really
So
all there is to it?
there's that, but then what you can do is use like a mobbing timer to set a timer so that
Mhm.
everybody gets a turn at
Oh,
both
cool.
driving and navigating. So you're learning how to map as you're going through, and everybody's learning it and figuring out new. So it creates this reflexive practice that's like self-referential inside the actual exercise,
And David's
and
got
you're
an
improving it as you go.
analog timer, and I get Miro has a timer in it too, so that's like you got options.
Yep.
But that way, people are rotating out, and everyone's getting a chance to try to see the system and make sense of it.
Yep. And you're like getting the value of people who are like more introverted, and people who are more and less experienced, because in a mob you've got these different levels of experience, and like and everybody has this different perspective, but they're all valuable. Like
Mm.
people who are new to it are going to be asking completely different questions than the people who've done it for a long time, and they're going to feed into each other into a better understanding. And that diversity of thought, that diversity of uh, experience, of identity, all of those things play into how effective you're able to mob, how effectively.
Mm. That makes sense, and also like it's terrifying to be the driver. I think at first, although
Yeah, and
David didn't look phased.
it really is kind of
I'm used to it
terrifying.
by now.
um and so like you want to encourage your group to find empathy, and that's a bigger thing that becomes important, like valuing dissent. No, allowing people to say, no, I don't think that's right, and um, allowing yourself to be okay with not doing it perfectly becomes, and not having too many expectations around
Mm.
anything.
So like it's not
So
just mapping alone, it's not just learning alone, but it's learning with each other and mapping together in order to do that. Um,
mhm.
I think a lot of organizations are missing that togetherness, like not really having the chance to literally be learning with.
Yeah,
Um,
and this is a thing anybody can do. You don't have to be a developer, but you do end up creating things that can be developed from. You're gaining more clarity. If we want to keep going with it, like we could start connecting what what we've what we've got so far,
yeah,
or
and just to check in on like from your standpoint, like are there other things you want to talk about from the collaboration side of stuff? Because I can see how this plays out, right? Like we form the value chain, and then we position the parts according to evolution, and then that makes
yeah.
a Wardley map, and then we can have the questioning part. Like is there like a difference in the way the mobbing takes place throughout that process? Like does mobbing work differently with relationships or evolution, or does it work mostly the
maybe
same?
a, maybe a little bit. So I don't know if you want to pull in like an actual Wordly map, X and Y axis.
Yeah, I can grab that.
You can do that, and
Yeah.
we could start start with Wordly mappers. And oh yeah, like a big thing that Wordly mapping needs are uh, like we're talking about collaboration. So
Mm-hmm.
depending on how strict you want to be with the mob, you'd say, hey, David, add a collaboration need on there.
Got it. Yeah. Well, and that's actually an interesting question, the strictness part of this. So
Yeah.
Megamorph in chat asked like, how do you typically time box the different steps, the different stages of the process?
depends on how long you've got, but usually it's a 10 or 15-minute rotation.
Got it.
Mhm.
Like the work of exploring what's going on with Wardley mapping could take infinity amounts of time. So it's kind of like, well, we've got 2 hours. Let's make the most of
Yeah.
it. That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. And so then as long as your timer's running, like we've got a mob timer that you can download off of our open source site on Pluralsight, or there's one built into Visual Studio Code where if you've got like a a collaboration live share session going,
Okay.
it'll pop and like alert you, and you can enter who's next. You can enter your rotation in there.
Oh wow. Okay. So I think I found it in the Pluralsight GitHub. It looks like there's a whole thing there. That's cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now I might just completely start over, but we've got all of this stuff on the side,
Uh-huh.
and say, okay, put Wardley mappers at the top of the map. I'd copy that over.
Got it. Are we going straight to the Wardley map side of this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Okay, cool.
I think so. I mean, we've got,
So we'll copy over Wardley mappers and then
for time's sake,
yeah.
and then I'd copy over maybe maybe we should really dive into collaboration because that's what we've been talking about.
Okay. So I'm just
And from there, say, okay, we've got Miro, we've got images, we've got discussions. All of those things are things that could be placed on the map.
okay. So I'm just gonna copy all those things over here.
Yeah,
Does that look right?
yeah.
Okay. So then if I just take like a guess at how things are related, I'll
Mm-hmm.
just I'll mess this up, right? So I'm just
Yeah.
gonna draw it like this. So in order to collaborate, we need to
Oh,
discuss.
yeah. So let me show you something cool that I've been doing, like with the arrows,
Yeah?
right? I'll pull the arrows in. What the arrow? I don't know how to do this in here. But, and Miro, I didn't like the way it does the arrows so much, but you can like say Wardley mappers need to collaborate, right?
Makes sense.
And they use discussing, you know, and they also use mapping,
Yeah.
right? And they build images, they build an image of their map. Something like that. Like it kind of gives you a little bit of a story inside the
I
map
love
itself.
this.
This is awesome. Okay.
This is so helpful. And it also goes back to a point I know Ben makes a lot, is one way to know if your map makes sense and is working is if you can read it back as a sentence.
And I was doing that for like dependencies trees, like for the value chain side of it,
Mhm.
like user needs the need needs the capabilities, or depends on is another phrase I use a lot. But I like playing with that format and using these different words to describe them, because like it actually embeds more context. Like I'm thinking about like, okay, discussions. Well, okay, I know what discussions look like. No, you don't. You don't know the way that I am thinking about them. Like I am thinking about them as extremely strict questions and
Mhm.
answers, and so the discussions come from the questions, and that's important. But it's embedded now in the way that all this
So
is
you might
related.
say, oops, I didn't mean to delete that. So you might say questions. Ah, I don't know how this works. Dang it. Let's not do that. Say answers,
Ooh, yeah.
right? And so you're saying, I don't know, something like you can get these different relationships going to kind of say, I don't know, it's this is weird with Miro. I'm not used to it, but
Oh, that's great. Like I think we see what you're going for, and also I
Mhm.
like how like I often like say that Wardley mapping like there's the evolution part of it, which I think is a unique thing. Then there's the visualization approach, which is the dependency tree kind of style, the value chain style of doing things. I like how this is playing a little bit with that dependency tree thing in order to make it more narrative almost.
yep,
It's not saying that the value chain is holy. It's saying that the value chain, maybe instead of a value chain, we're talking about like just relationships, like more pure ontology kind of
Mhm.
questions, like how are these related? And I'm super into that. Cool.
so you could say like questions generate custom answers, like
Yeah.
kind of put it on the in the right space.
Yep. Oh yeah. Okay. So I'm reading this and I'm seeing the like this makes sense to me. Um, so I think you've like managed to extract the ideas from my brain, and we did that together, which was really cool. How do you do like discussion, like the negotiation side of this? Like, what happens if maybe you're driving in the mob like format, and like David and I get into a discussion, and we yes the counter is counting down, like we only have 10 minutes to talk about this whole map, and we're getting really sidetracked by which collaboration tool to use. Like David wants to use Lucid, and I want to use Mural or something. How do you
Right.
handle
So you
that?
just so you just I mean, in this instance, I'd say, okay, great. But we really want to focus on this area of the map. Like we really want to focus on how are we getting the answers, and rather than, so I'd just point to it and say, okay, great, we've got that down, but here's the answers. We don't have anything built to help us draw answers from people. And,
Yeah.
so let's talk more about like, how do we, shore up our questioning process to make sure we're getting the answers that we want? Or that's just an example, I guess.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, you capture what's being said, and then you say, okay, yes, but not now.
Yeah.
We're focusing on something else, and it's clear
Yep.
that there's like the theory of constraints view on making a map. I think is like you're ultimately I think you're trying to do like throughput of decision to actions. I guess like you're trying to actually change stuff in the real world based on what you
Mhm.
learn by making a map, and like okay, so put action aside for a second, assume that it's going to happen within the realm of knowing things. It's like where is the constraint on our knowledge towards action? And it's not going to be enumerating all of the various tools that you could make a map in because there are a lot. But
Yeah.
it's in this hole that without an answer to the question, an answer is part of this. If we don't have a design for that, this whole thing falls apart. So the
Right.
constraint is
Like
there.
what plays into asking the right questions? Well, the diversity, right?
Yeah,
Like we're talking about that. I can't spell.
it's close enough. We all know what you mean.
Uh, diver, yeah. Um, and you've got like, because that feeds into the mental models
Mm-hmm.
that you're able to imagine, like, so something like, you could say, this is all what helps you get better answers, you
Yeah.
know, and like, so it helps you see, well, the more questions we can come up with, the better answers we're going to get. I don't know, something like that.
Oh, that's great. Okay, cool.
And you can just start placing things and playing with it.
Yeah. So I guess I'm feeling struck a bit right now by how well, on the one hand like messy this is, but also on the other hand like how simple it is. Like it's not. I guess like I've felt overwhelmed in the past trying to map with others. I can remember moments where it was just like really 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 hard to do it with folks because there wasn't a structure for it. And I've heard lots of stories about like people trying to make maps together and just completely falling flat on their face because I mean it's hard. But I like this mob style format of giving people roles, limiting playing a facilitation angle on this, and like making sure that we keep moving within a time box, all that kind of stuff. That seems really really helpful.
Mhm. It's definitely been helpful for me. And a lot of times, like we get to this point now, oh, it's overwhelming. Start over. Just start over and
Mm-hmm.
tell the story again
Yeah.
until it makes sense. And then, oh, break it out. Well, we need to map this portion separately. So go do that. Like pull it out. Like there's a whole value chain here that we don't have space to evaluate in the current map. Let's pull it out, build another map using it.
Okay. So you're really embodying that thing that Kat Swatell talks about, where you make a map and throw it away, make a map and throw it away. But it's
Yeah.
not just
And
mapping.
but you can do it all in the same board, and just
Yeah.
keep it. And
Okay.
it's just like this, you can see the evolution of it. And then once you get to a place where it's like, this tells the story really clearly, it's got everything I need, but not too much, then you can start soliciting feedback from other people.
That makes
Like,
sense. So if I play with this just for a second, like off to the right, if I, the thing that's jumping out of me is that like none of this is important except for the mental models angle on this. I don't care about platforms. I don't care about what have you. Like if I remake the map again from the top, like collaboration depends on discussion, but a particular kind of discussion, then
right?
it then it's like all about like the questions and answer part of this, and now we could have a deeper conversation about what's going on there. Like how do the mental models and the diversity perspective in the room, like doing the work, how did those relate? Like I might start talking about modes of like liberating structures, formats for this kind of stuff. Like maybe what I needed all along was actually just a facilitation method, not a tool, which I think would be an interesting kind of thing to take away from this. But then I could spend my time working on this part and not like this part of it, which is I think
Yeah.
relatively uninteresting.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. All right. So where does this leave you? Like you're starting to, I think, maybe I think define some of the edges of mapping as a practice. Like
Mm-hmm.
what are you oriented towards next? Like what kinds of problems are you going to are you anticipating experiencing with the teams that you're working on now that you've got this mobbing kind of format down?
I think it's in my space, it's more getting more people doing it and learning from them, like
Oh,
seeing
okay.
how they approach it. Because I've got this idea of like separating things out into nouns and verbs and making it work, but some of the people that I've seen doing it are like, combining all of this stuff in one little piece, and then breaking it out in other, like using ways that don't fully make sense to me yet.
Yeah.
So like pulling that apart will be interesting. Um,
Yeah, Augusto in the chat is like, this is blowing my mind. I'm feeling very much the same because
Yeah.
one, I had never thought about the like literally retelling the story as like a motivating kind of approach to make drawing new maps until you find the thread that you're actually there to follow, I think.
mhm.
And then also branching and just like kind of going off and exploring. And I hadn't actually this is gonna I feel like I should have thought of this, but I hadn't. Like I hadn't thought of just using a mirror board and expanding out and like really just exploring all the angles and just you could come back and retrace those steps if you ever needed to. But also the nouns and verbs, like using different verbs on the relationships than just dependency. Like that's a huge difference, and I think it's one that might actually help people um, get a lot of the benefit out of Wardley mapping without necessarily following the strict, like Wardley designed approach.
Right.
I think it's important that we play with this stuff and actually test those edges and find out that
Yep.
maybe like dependency isn't the only way to represent relationships.
Yeah, it's
It's
not.
huge.
It is. I mean, they're linguistic dependencies, right? Like when you're talking about it, it's and this is a linguist like this is like mapping uh from like an information systems like category theory type thing. You're mapping the language to build the common language that is necessary to really strategize using the more refined techniques in Wardley mapping.
I think that might be the missing piece in a lot of the case of like adopting Wardley mapping. It's like all or nothing for people.
Yeah.
And I keep thinking that there's like, it's just a big like pile of raw material. And especially David and I have been talking about this. Like, what are the little parts of Wardley mapping that we can carve off and just present to people as standalone tools? And I keep hearing stories about folks who just had a conversation about evolution. Like, they just took evolution, they laid out Genesis, custom built, product, and commodity, and then they just said, okay, what are the parts of the system that fall into each of these categories that we need to talk about? And like, they didn't do value chains, they didn't do user needs, like, and yes, of course, you want to know all those things, you should know all those things, but to get value, and I think this comes back to the question originally asked around helping people understand how it's useful. It's like, well, you don't throw the entire buffet at them. You give them one tool that is obvious what it does and what benefit it provides. I think that's huge.
Yeah, you can't get to strategy until you've built the common language, and the map is what actually helps you build that common language. And you're not going to, like, that's what I'm seeing, that there's this evolution of the mapping process itself.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you're getting to the point where you can map it, and that you can't even place it on an axis of evolution until you understand what it is you're like talking about. And
Yep.
this is your common language map.
Yeah.
Ubiquitous, your ubiquitous language that helps you build the domain controllers and operations and domain model, that then you're taking your domain model, building code around it, and putting that on a axis of evolution in the larger marketplace. And you can pick apart pieces and different things with it and say, well, we should be focusing on this because in the marketplace there's nothing here that meets that need, and yet there's all this other stuff that does, so we can use parts and pieces of it. And that's when it becomes really cool, because you can start planning out how you're going to implement your code and in what order, and prioritize.
Yeah. I like what Barbara Frontera says here. It's like that moment when people realize that they're using the same words but not talking about the same thing.
You get that all the time, and that feeling is exciting, right? Like, that's part of the magic of this mapping thing, is like, oh, I've been equivocating this with this other person and they're thinking I'm meaning this, and look, it's here on the map. Now we've got both of them.
Yeah. It's like, my favorite word, right? Maybe this year is disambiguation. Just such a word, like in the dictionary, when you open up a word and you see it's like different ways of separating out what one label, one handle for a whole set of different concepts, trying to separate those concepts in your mind. It's like
on Wikipedia, right?
Yeah. That's exactly it. Yeah. Oh man, I love this. Okay. So talking about like sort of the next frontier of this, like as you start doing this with more people, what kind of practices do you think you're going to end up having to deliver or like develop, I guess? Is it just about like the scaling up part of it, or is it about just facilitation, or what feels like the edge?
I feel like it's more, I think it's really getting tight on what I've seen where people struggle is when they're conflating too much in one little piece of it. And then they're not diving deep. And that's the problem we've got in our whole society right now. Like, that's the edge of our culture. We are not diving deeply enough in these conversations, and we are hearing people and not able to dissent and say, no, that doesn't feel right to me, or no, that doesn't look right to me, or they're not using their internal senses to really say, do I understand this? And teaching them that practice is what will help them map better, but also help them become like less afraid in a broader context.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? It's like this, it helps you become a better human if you let it.
Yeah. I think
Break down your fears.
it's the confrontation thing. Or not like confronting each other, but like not turning away from the moment where you're like, well, I don't understand that. Like actually like facing it and going, okay, I don't understand that. And
Yeah.
will you help me? Like, will
Yeah.
you engage with me to sort of explore that, what that word means and what you were saying by that?
Yeah.
Um, there's like this,
Like,
like,
oh, what's an answer? What, what would constitute an answer to these questions? Like, what are the attributes that you're talking about? What are you associating when you're using that word? What's a question?
yeah, I almost want to dig in. I've been reading a bit of like Donna Haraway, Staying with the Trouble,
Mhm.
and thinking about that a bit. It's just like not being overly optimistic, not being overly pessimistic, but actually just sitting with the messiness and sitting with that messiness together, like doing that work together. I think that's super powerful. So pulling kind of back a little bit, we just to recap what we've done so far, right? We've played with kind of like your like kind of algorithm for getting started with making a map. We've kind of explored this idea of mapping, so applying like mob programming approaches to making Wardley maps, which was
Mhm.
surprisingly simple. I expected way more like complexity to the process. Like I expected to like have uh, way more ways to mess up or something, but it seemed like relatively easy to do, and so now I'm just kind of excited to do that more. Um,
Yeah.
and oh, and this is a good question too. Megamorph asks, like, how do you typically conclude the mapping session? Because
So
he's
so usually we run out of time, and we keep getting together and saying, okay, if everybody's satisfied with this describing the problem that we're trying to solve, that's the conclusion. For like, well, now we need to go build something. Everybody comes to that
yeah,
conclusion naturally. Like that's what seems to be happening. Like, yes, this explains it. Now we need to make sure we've got the approvals or whatever it is that you need to do to say, here's the map we've built. This is what we want to do. This is why we want to do it, because it's all there in the map.
yeah.
And then you're able to say, okay, engineers, you understand this, we understand this. Now we can start breaking out the commands, building a service blueprint, um, do event storming around like how the code's going to be structured if you're coding it.
So now,
um,
like, if I were to take that to the extreme, like the thing that I want to go do right now is I want to go design a system for questions and answers
yeah.
and like
so
envision that.
so what I do, I've got stuff for all this,
Oh yeah.
but but like I've got I basically build matrices and say, here's all the people that we need to account for, and add questions, and start coming up with the questions that are necessary to be answered and who can answer them. So it's like a decision matrix, but it's for questions. So I don't know. There's all these other things that I do in the maps. Like the map is to help me get situational awareness where we are at right now. A lot of times then I'll break off things like and color them differently if we're retiring something, or if we're putting it into maintenance mode, or if we're going to build something, I'll put it around like a dotted red line and say, this is what we're proposing to do versus this is what already exists. There's a lot of different directions to take it in, depending on like the strategy that you kind of come up with as you're like going through this learning process that mapping reveals.
And there's another question here. Do you
Mhm.
go back to the same maps and discuss progress, or is all of this kind of transient?
Uh, It depends. Sometimes if there's been progress made, I'll actually integrate it into the map so that it's kind of like this moving target as it becomes more and more specified. So it's actually like almost a documentation process that you can use to help you see the evolution of what's happened.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
All right. So I think let's wrap it up here, and we're going to share a little bit, I think, about some events that are coming up. But Jenny, how should people reach out to you? How should they get in contact if they want to talk about mapping and collaboration with you?
Probably Twitter's the best way. It's JD
Awesome.
Carlston. Yeah.
JD Carlston on Twitter, and
Mhm. Or I guess my Medium site too.
yeah, okay, cool. So you've got some writing on Medium. Um,
Mhm.
David and I are going to be running some workshops coming up as well, in addition to these kinds of live stream things. And so if anyone here wants to make sure that you're up on the latest stuff that's coming up, go to lwm.events and you'll see live streams, you'll see workshops. We're doing a workshop, I think this upcoming Wednesday, yes? Next week?
Mm-hmm.
And so be sure to join us for that. We're going to be doing some mapping inside a small group intensive workshop context. And Jenny, I wanted to thank you for your time and sharing this like awesome technique with us. Like I can't wait to see what people are going to do with like doing Wardley mapping, like mob style. Like that, it just is so exciting to see what people are going to do with that. So thanks for being here.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. It's fun. Appreciate it a lot.
And of course, to everyone in the chat, thank you for being here too. We couldn't be here without you. Um, and I'm gonna do the catchphrase again. Not sure if David is cringing at this point or not, but I genuinely
I love
believe
it.
that knowledge is power, and I think making maps helps you develop knowledge and therefore power. So go make some maps. Reach out to us on Twitter. Say hello. Always happy to hear from you. And with that, thank you and goodbye.